Okay, my next question, Pastor Steve says, I have a Christian friend that is close to me and our families are good friends, but they never go to church. I want to encourage them to go and get into fellowship, but don't want to pressure them or ruin our friendship. What should I say to them?
What I say to people in those situations is, Jesus went to church. Why aren't you going? You know, there's a passage. This is a good passage for you. This is out of the book of Luke, and it's where Jesus is actually announcing his ministry. And it's in Luke. Let's see, chapter 4. In verse 16, it says, so he came up to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And then it says, and he stood up to read. And so Jesus' custom was to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And that's interesting, because a lot of times the reason that people say that they don't want to go to church is because, you know, they'll say things like, I don't believe in organized religion. Right. And whenever somebody says that, I go, who do you think organized it? You know, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a bunch of church guys. The organization of the church comes from the Bible. And so Jesus is the one who set up the church. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 16, on this rock I will build my church. And so he's the one who organized it. The church is based on the synagogue. We do a lot of the things that synagogues did in the first century, and Jesus went to the synagogue. And so he was in worship on a weekly basis. And again, it says that was his custom. Another thing that people say about not wanting to be in fellowship is that I don't learn anything there. You know, I never get anything out of the sermon. Either they're speaking over my head or they're too simple. You know, I've got both of those things. And how much do you think that Jesus learned from a sermon? You know, he's the guy who wrote the book. And so he wasn't just there for a sermon.
Right.
The Bible teaches that the reason that we go to fellowship, go to church, is so we can have fellowship with other believers, obviously so we can learn from the scripture, and so that we can minister to others. And so obviously Jesus is there to minister to others. And sitting off by yourself is not something that's an option. Another passage that I share with people is out of Hebrews chapter 10. And in that passage, it says this, verse 24 and 25. It says, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And so one of the reasons for fellowship, for going to church, is to stir up love and good works. These people, you know, that I have known who are outside of church think that they're okay until actually they start meeting up with other Christians and start realizing how deficient their walk with God is many times, actually every time. How deficient their walk with God is. And that's what fellowship is for. It stirs up love and good works. And then the other thing that you see in the passage is exhorting one another. And so much the more as you see the day approaching. One of the specific things that Satan wants to do with believers is get them away from each other. He wants to isolate believers, put them in a little place where they're all by themselves so that he can do whatever he wants with them. Divide and conquer is not just a military doctrine. Satan uses that, and he's been using it ever since the first sin with Adam and Eve. He's been using that tactic with everyone, and people who are in that kind of situation and are satisfied with it are deceiving themselves. And when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not talking about people who are shut in or people who can't get out because of medical issues or that kind of stuff. It's still good to get fellowship. You get it any way that you can. But again, you know, people that can get up and go to church need to get up and go to church. You know, most of the stuff that's cool that happens around here happens when we gather together. And that's the way that God designed it. So,
All right.